Hello again, and welcome back to An Aesthetic Education. I am delighted to be rejoined today by Coleman Charters, the Phoenix-based painter whose vibrant Western-inspired artwork I have long admired and have seen in person on many occasions. Coleman, welcome back. When Coleman and I spoke last time, it was very much an introduction to him, to his work, to the world that he inhabits as an artist. Today, I really wanted to do something a little different, less of an introduction and more of a real conversation. Because there are things that come up again and again when I speak with artists, things that don't always make it into the so-called polished version of their story. And I wanted to give those things some space so that we could actually have some new insight. So
Mm.
we are going to talk about what it actually takes to build a life as an artist, not the romantic version, not the myth, but the actual real thing. The question of whether you even feel entitled to call yourself an artist in the first place, the anxieties that sit alongside the creative process, the way criticism lands and what you do with it, and the practical and often unglamorous business side of making a career out of something that you love. I think these are conversations that matter, not just for artists, but for anyone who's ever had a creative impulse and found themselves unsure of what to do with it. So Coleman, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for offering your thoughts on these many different topics. So
Of
I
course,
want to
man.
get us started. Yes, I want to get us started with something simple, or at least something that sounds simple. The very word that is artist. So when did you start using it about yourself, and what did that actually feel like?
Well, first of all, thank you so much again for having me. It's always an honor being around my fellow artists, especially you. Um, the word artist to me is something that resonates through my head maybe a trillion times a day, either from the fact that the people around me, I feel very lucky that I have so many people that refer to me as he's the artist. And I'm like, damn, that's so wonderful to hear, but it is a really heavy term. You know, um, when I first started creating art, the last thing I'd consider myself was an artist. I really love to tell people I was a doodler. I
Mhm.
love to tell people that, I've been playing around with paint lately. I've been, my favorite thing to use is a pencil because I'm terrified of mistakes, you know. Um when I first thought I wanted to be an artist or something similar, I decided to go to school. I went to ASU for a while, and it didn't really resonate. It felt wrong, and I wasn't really motivated. I wasn't excited. I had so many friends around me that were like, "Yeah, I'm in business school," and they still went to class on the worst of days, and on the best of days, I was like, "Yeah, I'm in art school," and I would skip class. I wasn't even interested because I didn't have a single thread of direction to go in. Um, After my first stint in college, I decided that it wasn't meant for me at the time, and I was like, you know what, I'll try to go a more practical route. I don't think that I could ever sell drawings, paintings, whatever have you. So I thought, I should become a graphic designer. I've been doing graphic design for my dad and his business for a while. I could just kinda lie my ass off on the interviews, and, I walk in 22 years old with no degree of anything, and I'm like, "Yeah, I could totally do what you're asking me to do and just learn it along the way." After a couple of those jobs, I realized it was a very controlled HR, business-like atmosphere, and it was the opposite of art.
Mhm.
I found myself to be extremely depressed. Um I guess somewhere along the line, I moved on to making larger paintings, and that felt better because I was kinda like, dodging the idea of seeing tiny mistakes. A bigger canvas, it's harder to really point out where I screwed up, and I can maybe pass it along as I'm sort of an artist at the time. But along the way, I finally found a little bit of traction on my Instagram, some of my social media, and I finally got into my first gallery, and I sold my first 2 pieces, and that's definitely where, at the time, I thought I was a fan. I really was like, "Wow, I'm an artist. I successfully have some sort of staple or, real official adjective to my name."
Yeah, I feel that's really interesting because I think actually a lot of people, right, and I hear this again and again, right, from various people in the industry, but they spend years doing the work, right? What it takes to be creative, right? And at the same time, they're almost like reluctant. They almost are like refusing the title. Well, it's like, I'm not an artist yet. Whether that means that they're in art school, right? Whether that
Mm,
means that they're doing what you were doing, which is working in a creative field.
mm,
It's something that almost, I guess, people have to feel like, as just what you said, right? Oh, when I was in a gallery and I sold work, I
mm.
felt like an artist. It has to be conferred by somebody else, whether that's a gallery, a critic, I don't know, income that comes from the work that you are doing.
Mm.
Um, so what do you think? Where do you think that reluctance almost comes from in that sense?
I mean, it's such a large word that no matter who you are, even from a very young age, of course, it depends on what parts of the world you're from, and but here in America, at a young age, you're shown Da Vinci first. You know, you're shown this is a guy that finally made headlines 1,000 years after he died, and it's like, okay, so I'll never be an artist. I'll never be that great because we introduced art as this 1,000 pound, almost like you said, confirmation from others that they're an artist. And only after they've died and only after they've suffered and been dredged through the canal that they're an artist. And that's horrible. That felt that definitely stopped me personally when I was younger from calling myself an artist because I just didn't think I deserved it.
Yeah. Do you feel now that the label is more solid, so to speak? Like if somebody pushes back, right? Or somebody asks, you know, what's your quote unquote real job? Right? Do
Mhm.
you feel like it kind of wobbles a little bit? Or is it now at the point in your own life, or at least in your own career or self perception, that it's almost no, this is the label I'm confident and comfortable with?
Well, I had to that's a great question. I had to really identify what my definition of art is. You know, I feel comfortable saying everything in this life is really an opinion. You know, there are some things that are really fact based. I won't deny that, but when it comes to what you view as art or who is an artist, it's an opinion. And art to me is creation. There's a quote by, Francis of Assisi, of all people, who, for anybody that doesn't know, he was this, Italian mystic. He was like a poet, and he was a Catholic friar. He has a quote that is, "He who works with his hands and his head and his heart is an artist." Now, whether I'm painting, whether I'm selling and painting, or I've sold 1,000,000,000,000 paintings and or at the very least, I'm the postman. In some part of the day, we had to design something, and we had to create it and we had to think with our head, and we're an artist. That's at least my opinion. And so when people ask me, you know, "What do you do for a living?" I'm finally at this stage where I immediately jump to it and I go, "Well, I paint my ass off." I'm an artist, and second, I tell them, all the lovely work I get to do at the Western Spirit Museum.
Yeah. Right. And it goes hand in hand, really, when you think about it.
Mm.
One cannot be without the other. So,
Yeah, exactly.
right. Amazing. So let's move on from the label, right? And let's talk about almost the mythology, right, of
Mm,
the artist. And you mentioned it briefly before. It does like not a lot of damage, but there is a burden to it, let's say, right? It is that image, as you said, about the tortured genius, right?
mm.
Everybody who has to suffer almost beautifully, right, in order to create something or exist within this or ordinary world, and they almost have to exist slightly apart, right? The observer, so to speak.
Mm,
And it's kind of a seductive rationale, let's say,
mm,
right? And it definitely contains some truth. Obviously, we know from the history of art going all the way back to the very beginning, right? The idea of where the tortured genius comes from.
mm,
Um, but it also kind of papers over a lot of things that are maybe even more interesting than this so-called myth of the artist, right? So what did you believe about what this life would look like before you were actually living it? So before you were like, living this sort of professional art life, what did you think it was going to be like? And did it turn out to be something completely different?
mm. You know, I had a couple chances to meet a couple different types of artists growing up. I don't remember his name, but there was some sort of guest speaker at the Eric Fischl, gallery over at Phoenix College, and I remember walking into his gallery show, and he was so calm and so positive, and he was just, like, listening to the people that were really wanting to talk to him, and I remember thinking to myself, like, "That's it. It's perfect. It's the artist's life is calm and collected. I bet all these pieces are sold." You know what I mean? Like, I bet he doesn't have a worry in the world. And the truth is that, I was really wrong. I think most artists, and just from the good hundreds that I've met, are very anxious people, and I had no idea. I thought I was gonna be an anomaly with how anxious and I guess depressed I can be in my art career. And I just thought that was gonna be so gone. I thought that was gonna dissipate completely as my art career has leveled up, and I've met more talented people like you, for example. I, you know, I really I also thought that once you sold one piece, that was it. That was the key to the mayor handing you the key to the city saying, like, "You got a residency, you got a supermarket card, your gas tank is never empty," and it just, it's the opposite. You have to balance an incredible amount of self-pressure, outside pressure, and every other aspect to life, you know?
I think do you feel that almost the journey that you've taken up until this point has sort of contributed to that notion of anxiety related to art and the creation of art? Or is it a personal, like no matter what, even if you found it very easy, let's say, and you had great commercial success from day one, you would have
Mm.
still felt that?
You know, I appreciate the childhood I had, but I do come from a background where, it's very different now, but it was loud at home, and it was loud at school, and anywhere else it was loud. So even before I really got into art, in between all of these things that kind of made me an anxious person, I I I was working towards like, "Oh gosh, like, how do I deal with this?" And it comes from both, outside of life, brought me anxiety, and then there were a lot of aspects of succeeding and failing in art that brought me anxiety. It's kind of every which way I looked, I was like, "I'm just gonna have to deal with this." Like, this is it's not so negative either. I, hope that doesn't
Yeah.
come off and,
No,
"Oh, whoa."
no, not at all, actually. I think it's very realistic, right? I think
Mm,
fundamentally that's the point, in which most people who maybe do not pursue a creative endeavor, let's say, which, creativity obviously takes various forms, but maybe the people who feel most disconnected from it will probably not understand. So it's a
mm.
good thing to sort of frame in that context. So building off of that, I want to focus on almost one myth in particular. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it because you also come from both a commercial background and obviously the artistic one, which is, almost spiritual, let's say, basing off some of the things that we've talked about, right? So this idea that commercial work and serious artistic work are fundamentally in conflict, that if you're painting to sell, you're somehow compromising the essential piece that is the art, right? Do you actually buy into that or not so much?
You know, I think that's another great question, but it's very personal. Um, I wake up almost every day and I start thinking about what I want to create that day or what to do, what I'm late on. And then I remind myself that if I'm late, they're gonna have to wait because I woke up today to create. I really need to sell. And, for God's sakes, I don't feel like I wanted to start wandering the streets with no home or no valuables because I need to sell as well. So there's this fantastic tension between survival, audience expectations, galleries, algorithms, commissions, my own personal truth, and it's this. I need to remind myself every morning. I wake up to create. I don't wake up to sell, and if I do sell, fantastic. It's a hard one. It really is.
Yeah, and I'm almost hesitant to label it one way or the other when it comes to commercial versus,
Mm.
non-commercial pieces, so to speak, because inherently all great artwork was commissioned for some reason. right?
That's very true.
So that whether that comes from an individual or from the artist's need, right, to create, that's a different form of commission, but it's still commission, whether it comes from internal or external. But you did mention, obviously, this is a thought that you have from the very first moment that you wake up. So, what does the actual day kind of look like for you on a day where you're focused just on your own artwork? How does it start? How does it end? Right? Can you give us the non-filtered, non-social media truth?
Yeah, really. Like I said, I always positively win over my anxiety and my depressions. So when I wake up, the first thing I'm thinking about is a cigarette. I'm not gonna lie. I uh I wake up and I go, yeah, that'd be a nice fix right now because I get flooded immediately in the morning of, like I said, what I need to get done and what I'm happy to get done. But I ignore the vices. I wake up pretty early, about 6:30. I go on a nice run, probably just like a simple mile, and I've been really working hard at keeping that consistent every day because if something chases away my anxiety, it's definitely exercise. Who would have thought getting the body moving is something that's going to get me out of my head?
Mhm.
Um, after I go for a nice run, I try my hardest to remind myself before I grab any one of my materials. I'm sitting there like I didn't even remember to eat. Like part of this funny battle is that I shut down a lot of my needs. I'm constantly thinking about what I should be doing versus or excuse me, what I could be doing versus what I should be doing. So, eat, take care of yourself, literally like hygiene. And then, I try my hardest to spend maybe like 9 o'clock to maybe 5 o'clock at night just creating. And half of that is literally something in my hand, or I'm sitting on the couch just thinking in solace because I'm a really strong believer that half of art is literally just the process of thinking.
Do you find that when you are sort of eliminating the distractions, let's say, that it still flows, right? It does flow fairly easily all the time, or are there days where it's not happening? It's just not, no matter what you want, no matter what you're thinking about, even if you have an idea, it's just not working. So what do you do at that point when you've sort of hit that wall, right? So even if like you've set everything up, you're taking care of yourself, you're doing everything that you possibly can to do the right thing, to be creative, but it's just not happening.
Mm. You know, a lot of the time, in the past, I would really push myself to the point where I would still work on something even if the creative juices weren't flowing, or say I'm having a panicked day. I would still sit there and be like, "Damn it, you have to do this." And over time, especially like the last like 4 years, I've realized that's just my body telling me, Coleman, you need to do something that you're actually going to enjoy, or you need to relax. And I guess I've done a lot better job, like actually listening to my body scream at me. I'll be sitting there working on a commission, and every part of it is painful almost. And I'm like, Jesus, okay, I guess today's not the day, and that's fine. It's not like one of the people that's commissioned me isn't gonna text me right there and be like, "Why the hell isn't this in my house?" And if they did, screw them. That's horrible. Yeah, it's not in your house because I'm thinking about an asteroid hitting the Earth today. Like, and you just gotta flow with it. You gotta sit down and relax.
So keeping on track with that kind of the practical side, right? The practical pains, let's call them, of the art career as we know it. Um, I want to think about the uncomfortable conversation that basically every artist usually wants to avoid and every gallery wants to hide,
Mm,
which is the business side.
mhm,
Okay. Um, Obviously, I come from a background which focuses, as much as I would love to focus on just the art and just the aesthetics. I don't have always the talent to create myself in that area, but I do come from the business side of it as well. So thinking about pricing, commissions, right? The big words, platforms, right? How do you sustain this career that you've built, right? What do you kind of wish someone had told you earlier about the actual practical side of building a career,
Mm,
one that is, long term and actually sustainable.
mm. When I was younger, I had this moment. I guess I had this thought that I wanted to be a chef. It was definitely like kindergarten through maybe like second grade. So it was really early on. I thought just the idea of creating food was really fun. Something about it. I don't know where it came from, but I was interested. And I remember one night we were on vacation and we were at a restaurant where I basically like fell asleep in front of a chef while he was like really, really working a wok. And there was, fire, oil. So I
Mhm.
just kind of fell asleep. And I woke up and I remember my mom was like, you should go ask that chef like how he got into it or how he survived. Like my mom was just like, go be inquisitive. And I remember walking over to this artist and being like, I would like to maybe do what you do." And he looked me right in my little eyes and was like, don't do it." And I remember I sobbed my ass off. I was crying, like, all the way home. I feel like most of the artists that I've talked to about the business of being an artist, they always tell me something incredibly negative. They're like, "Yo, if you wanna be an artist, run." And that's terrible. You know, they I feel like most older artists will say don't pursue art, at least the ones I've met here in Arizona and a couple places in California, but I wish those artists were able to speak about the positive sides and how their life has grown, and again, the business side, I wish they could just tell me I wish they told me that it was definitely possible if you work your ass off. That'd be a lot better to hear.
So when you think about negotiating a price, right?
Mm,
Or dealing with a commission, we're going to get really, really practical here.
yeah.
With it's somebody that maybe asks you to adjust your vision in some way, right? Or, almost that, right? They're willing to pay this much on this occasion, but not so much on another occasion, right? Does does it feel like it lives in the same space as the creative work? Or are you kind of putting on the almost like you have the artist hat that deals with the creative and the artist hat that deals with the business?
Mm.
And how do you kind of manage those expectations between the desire to be creative and the practical side of running a business?
Definitely, pricing and negotiating used to be a hard thing, and I used to sell myself short a lot. And, over the years, I've definitely become a lot more confident with saying like, "Hey," even if I didn't have any commissions at the time, I was like, why would I appear desperate?" Even if, bills were due. I still remember the conversation between you and me when you really saved my ass with, commissioning me the first time we really talked. I still sat there and was like, "Okay, what I need is rent this month, obviously, but we're talking about a painting that I'm gonna make for this guy." And I remember sitting there being like, don't do it this time. I bet this guy respects you. I bet this guy understands art." And just throw a number out. And I remember the first number I threw out, you were like, "Yeah, man, let's make that work." And I remember sitting there being like, "Hot damn, all it really requires is just me to just believe a little bit, for God's sakes." But it definitely was the same hat, to come back to your question. Um, I'll sit there and I'll have this creative persona for the day, and then I'll get an email or a text asking, could you do this size for 300? And sometimes I absolutely can say, sure. Yeah, that's perfect. Or most of the time I tell people no, it's going to be more, or I don't know. It's something that comes with time. It is a confidence ordeal for sure.
Do you find that the world of social media it obviously impacts the business side of what you're doing, but it's kind of a strange space at the best of times, right? For any normal person, but maybe especially for visual artists, right? For someone like you, I mean, your work has a very strong sense of place. It's very physical. It's rooted in the West. Do you think the digital window kind of helps you in that respect? Or do you feel that while for things that you gain from it, a lot of the meaning of the work gets lost when it's visible in that lens?
Hmm. I always want to have a sincere conversation with people about art, and the best I can do when it comes to being sincere is when I'm in front of somebody. over social media. Whenever I post something, it's a single flavor on in a dish that I'm hoping has 100 flavors, and I think a lot of it does get lost. I feel like the minute I post something, somebody's like, "That is really cool. I wonder if I could buy it," and that's kind of the end of the conversation. If that was hanging in somebody's home, this hypothetical thing they bought, they're not going to really know much about it unless they pursue to talk to me about it. And that usually comes from an in person conversation. So truly, that digital window you're talking about, I think a lot of it does get lost. It can be a bummer sometimes.
It kind of also opens up the lens of, criticism and critique, obviously,
Mm,
right? When you
mhm,
post something like that. Um, how do you feel about your relationship with criticism? Obviously, artists come in for it all the time, right? Not and I'm not talking about like the composed professional version, like, okay, you got written up in the newspaper for a local gallery showing or something like that.
mm,
Uh, but like kind of, the real one where people maybe in your own life, friends, family, right? Or obviously people online, they kind of lay it on, let's say at random points. How does it land? Does it help you? How do you kind of deal with it?
mm. I guess even as a younger person, I guess when I was a kid, even then, without the confidence I have now, I still had the confidence to be like, "Yo, I would like to listen to this person." The chances of them being a crazy asshole is pretty slim, especially to a child or somebody working in the art career or trying to become a professional artist. It's very rare you're going to find somebody that's just trying to be mean to you. On top of that, we always have these people, our heroes or the stars of today are like, don't listen to the haters. Don't listen to the people that are trying to get you down. And the truth is that I love listening to the haters. I'm not gonna lie. There's a great feeling when I feel like I'm kind of being constantly praised. Anytime I go out with my girlfriend's family, and she has a huge family, someone has to bring up, "Oh, Coleman's an artist. Coleman's in a gallery." And I'm like, "That's awesome. I appreciate it." Does anybody have any real constructive criticism about the last cowboy I did?
Mhm.
And they're speechless. And I'm like, "Damn, I'm not gonna get anything from this." I think criticism is so good. Every time I've received negative criticism, I feel as if it's a great wall. Maybe for this hypothetical, a glass pane put in front of me. Because I can see the other side and I can see how tall it is. And now I know exactly how high to jump. When I know what the problem is, oh my God, are you kidding me? I don't have to sit here and finick with my anxiety and wonder how I'm gonna get better. You just told me how I'm gonna get better? Absolutely. Thank you. You didn't like my shit? Thank you. Like, oh my god. I went to a Legacy Gallery in Scottsdale. It's a really lovely place. One of my friends, John Babbitt, just got into there. And I remember 2 years ago, I walked in and I showed one of their curators some of my stuff. And without even asking, after a small conversation, this older British gentleman, he looked at me and he goes, "Well, I appreciate what you're doing, but it's just not quite there yet." And I remember sitting there being like, "Hell yeah. I love confirmation as to where I'm at. This guy's been in the art world. I appreciate that." And I didn't have to pay him for it. Oh my God. Like, it's a fantastic thing. I don't feel bad with criticism. I genuinely just think it's the next step, and it's a great feeling. It really is.
So let me ask then about maybe the most dangerous critic, okay? The internal critic,
Mm,
right? Possibly the harder one to deal with, right? There's that voice, right? That's almost there before you get any external opinion, right? On whatever you've created. How do you manage that particular relationship? Let's call it.
hmm. You know, the internal critic, in my opinion, is shut down from one thing, and that's your level of personal trust in your abilities. There's a lot of moments in my life where I sit back and I'm like, I'm like, "Do my friends even like me?" After spending 8 hours with them and making them laugh and them making me laugh and, we have the moment where it's like, "Oh, we're such good friends." I go home and the first thought is like, "They're probably not gonna invite me back." And it's nonsense. There's this really it's great. It's a great feeling to have this horrible little demon on your shoulder that was like, "Dude, this is your worst piece, and you should use it as fire kindling." But y the only thing I can do, and I can trust myself to do it, is to run into the gallery, slap on the wire on the back, sign it, and say, "Good luck." And every time I've done that, it sells. So, this internal critic that I have nowadays, it's the same one I had years ago, but now I get to finally tell him to shut up. There's no proof. There's absolutely nothing on my internal critic side to back up any of the anxiety anymore, you know? I've maybe had 2 pieces in my life that haven't sold, and I'm like, "Damn, that's screw it. I'm just gonna keep selling," you know?
I feel like what you've described in many respects is going back to what you spoke about earlier, which is that feeling of anxiety, right? That
Mm,
imposter syndrome almost, right? That is so inherently interwoven into the creative process and the creative life. And it's not something that you can obviously manage all the time, but it's something that, as you just said, when you utilize it, it's actually a force for maybe good, right? That
mhm,
push you further. Right. So thinking about that version of the struggling artist again, right? That we spoke about as this romantic vision, particularly for young people, right? Thinking about what you sort of mentioned earlier, which is the fact that you wish somebody had said, right? Yeah, it's hard, but
mm,
you know what? If you can pursue it, it's worth doing. Okay.
mm,
Um, what would you say to somebody, right, who is in that place, who maybe feels like the burden of that romantic suffering, so to
mm,
speak, and feels that that's the only way to actually attain their long term goal of being, like, quote unquote, the artist that they want to be?
mm. You know, uh, I love looking at my favorite stars and artists' composure. A lot of them have completely given up. It's not even a lot of times it's not even confidence. It's just this persona of staring at somebody that loves what they do. And for a lot of young artists, like you said, that are handling that horrible romantic pain, I if you give up, you'll feel so much better. If you stop trying so desperately hard to be this picture of what you consider an artist is, or a successful artist, or a selling artist, or whatever job, really. I mean, this applies to anybody. The quicker and the simpler that you give up, I think you're going to calm down, and a lot more things are going to start, actually smoothing itself out and coming to you. There's so many people that I know that have such an amazing natural gift for art, and they have both parts of being an artist, the creative part, the selling part, and the third, of course, the one I've mentioned of the quote unquote 2 parts, is the ability to create something original, and they decide it's all too much. I can't achieve this persona I've created in my head, and to tie it, to loop back around, give up. That person doesn't exist, and the only artist that's gonna exist is the one that you accept yourself for.
So lastly, our final
Mm,
kind of thought. What does Coleman the artist
mm,
really want anybody who comes to Arizona, right, is looking for a unique piece, right? What do you want them to sort of feel? Like the
mm.
actual feeling that you want them to leave with when they look at one of your paintings.
That's an ever-changing thought process of mine. In some of my paintings, I'm really like, "Well, that was cute." You know? I did a little guy on a horse. How nice. And sometimes I really want a heavy thought process of, "Wow, finally, somebody I've seen that made something original." And that's so hard. That's so hard to make an original piece, for God's sakes, you know? Especially with doing westerns. That's I'm not really killing it, and, half of my works aren't really considered original in my eyes, but I would love it if somebody were to leave the viewing of my paintings with the feeling that they've either seen something original, or I want them to ask, how does he connect himself to the West? Or what's the West to him? Or, whatever my setting is. I just want them to ask questions. I don't even want people to think it was very good. I just want people to be inquisitive, because that to me is the best feeling in the world. Just walking away from some scenario or some picture or some form of art, a conversation, being genuinely more inquisitive.
Amazing. Thank you, Coleman. Now, where can people see your art in person? Because I know you have some shows coming up.
Yeah, yeah, no, some really exciting stuff on the docket. Beginning of the year, I got called by my associates at my last gallery, Art One. After I think 30 some odd years, they closed their doors, but their team left to Phoenix, Arizona, to start a new gallery called B. Art Gallery. Um, I'll the literally though, it's such a fantastic feeling to be associated with them. Their team, Max and Rebecca, they do an amazing job, and over the years they've started to trust me more. So I pitched them an idea of a local artist's Western show, modern westerns, some abstract. We've titled it, what is it? Electric Frontier, and we're gonna do a large call to artists, and, we're really excited. We're gonna try and make a community show, and, it's gonna be great. We're putting a call to artists out on ArtLink. I think by the time this podcast is up, it should be out. But again, be art, and, we're gonna do a call to artists. It's gonna be great.
Amazing. Coleman, thank you. This has been exactly the kind of conversation I hoped it would be, honest and useful. I think our listeners will find a lot to take from it, whether they are artists themselves or simply people who've ever wondered what it might mean to pursue something creative in a serious manner. So
Mm.
if you are interested in seeing more of Coleman's work, the links to his website, the links to the gallery, and everything else on social media will be in the description of this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on your preferred podcast listening platform, whether that's on Instagram, on Facebook, where you can find us under altalena.art. Thank you very much for listening.